Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Upgunner by Christopher Bryde. What a brilliant crowd there is here tonight. Thank you all very much for taking the time to come out tonight. I think our plan for the evening is, well, you've already tried the whiskey and the cheese, so you've gotten the important stuff. The plan for the evening is, my name is Russell Schechter. I am the course leader for creative and professional writing. I've had the honor of working with Chris for quite a few years now. The plan for the evening is for us to have a little chat about the book and about some of Chris's experiences in writing it and of course the experiences which led to the writing of it. We'll give you all a chance to ask some questions of Chris about the book. And then, of course, the most important thing, Chris will, there are copies here for sale, and Chris will be signing copies of it. I suspect most of you don't need much of an introduction to Chris, but to do it formally, Chris was born in Alaska, not America. Chris was born in Alaska, and served as a U.S. Marine gunner with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment in Afghanistan, where he was severely injured by a Taliban IED. He spent, after that, several years in recovery and in treatment, retiring from the Marines, after which he joined a different battlefield, which is academia, not quite as dangerous, I have to say, by and large. Receiving a couple of degrees from an American university in Portland, and then came to us here at St. Mary's. I'm very pleased to say we were very lucky that he found his way to us here at St. Mary's. He began as an undergraduate in creative and professional writing, where first chance I had to work with him, along with some other folks who are here in the room. He received a first-class degree in creative and professional writing, and then stayed on to do our MA in creative writing first novel, which is where this book has its genesis, although even before that, we'll come back to that in a minute. And Chris, having received a distinction in his MA, in the first novel MA, Chris is now embarking on a PhD here in creative writing, which again, I have along with Jacob Phillips, have the very great honor to supervise. And maybe we might talk a little bit about what you're doing there as well. Chris has also starred in and produced a documentary, a really quite moving documentary, I think, called The Forgotten Battalion, about his units and their experiences post-Afghanistan, which is it's really quite an affecting piece of work, I think. As I'm sure many of you know, he is also quite the athlete. He's an Invictus Games athlete and will compete in the first ever Winter Invictus Games in February 2025. And let me just say one other thing as a way of introduction. I think lots of the people here from St. Mary's already know this. Chris has been, I think he's been a real blessing to St. Mary's University. He was a wonderful part of, has been a wonderful part of the creative writing program here over both his undergraduate and postgraduate. He has started many societies here, some of the biggest societies, a fishing society. There wasn't a fishing society here before. Some societies here, his deep engagement with the chaplaincy here at St. Mary's. He's been a wonderful mentor to other students as well, involved in the student union. So he's been great for us, and I like to think that St. Mary's has been good for you as well. Sorry, that's a very long-winded introduction. You're here to listen to him, not to me. So let me ask you to begin with. This Upgunner really started as a memoir. You started it, I believe, Dr. Richard Mills, who's over there, doing your undergraduate dissertation, and started this as memoir, and then it moved into fiction when you came to do the MA. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process of starting to write this as memoir, and then taking that and trying to rework it to transform it into fiction, into a novel.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, long-winded.
So Dr. Richard Mills' nonfiction class was incredibly beneficial to me in a lot of ways. It was very therapeutic. I didn't tell him the other day, but I went to one of his book events for one of his Beatles books, and I almost started tearing up during it because it reminded me when I was in his class, when I was still really struggling. And we read a lot of books in that class, and I didn't like any of them. I didn't like the...
That's a very Christian thing.
I didn't like the In Cold Blood, Truman Capote. I thought it was really depressing. But the way he taught it and everything, it gave me sort of a freedom to write and a comfort to write. It was very strange. And that's when I first started what would ultimately become that, like you said. I don't know, I think I explained this to you before, talking about truth in writing. And before that class, I was quite narrow when I told the truth in writing, where it just was objective fact. But the way Dr. Mills taught it, you can still tell the truth, but make it entertaining or make it flow better. And so that's what really got me going with that, because I just didn't want to write the objective truth, I guess. So it's just a bit depressing.
I mean, that's a really interesting question for this book in particular. I mean, you did start, doing the stuff with Richard, and like I say, the first 4,000 words, I think it was 4,000 words, that were in this form of memoir. And then, you decided to, and we had a long conversation about this, or more than one conversation about this. What one can do as memoir is very different from what one can do as fiction. There are different requirements for the two forms. They are different forms. There's different expectations, particularly for readers. And I think that revolves to some extent around truth, which is to say, there's an assumption, perhaps false, that memoir is truth, and fiction, by definition, is not. But there are other things as well. You simply cannot tell a story in the same way as a memoir as you can, because when people pick up a novel, they have certain expectations of a novel. Were you daunted by that fact? Did you struggle with the question of taking this from memoir, from memory, from truth, to a different kind of truth in fiction?
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, when I initially approached you about doing the MA, you said don't do it. You said it'd be too difficult, like write something new, and I agreed with you. I was like, no, I want to do it with this, and I think one of my arguments I use with you is one of my favorite directors, Werner Herzog, and he's got this famous scene where he's got this drop of water on this leaf, and it's the way the light shines is really impressive. But it's not actually a drop of water, it's a drop of nitroglycerin. And he did that because it reflects the light differently. And that was basically what I was saying, is I want to do that with this.
Do you think you gained or lost anything in not doing this as memoir and in doing it as fiction instead?
Well, there's quite a bit of freedom in fiction, and I think you have quite a bit of, you're able to tell different truths and focus on truths a little bit different than you are with just the facts. Yeah, there's a bit lost. I mean, I think you gave me the best grade for a dissertation that creative writing has ever done that year, so it wasn't terrible, obviously.
No, of course.
And a lot of that was lost.
But I mean, more for yourself in terms of the things you wanted to say. I mean, I think that, one of the things you said at the time was you had a reason for writing this as one of the reasons you had for writing this as fiction was in terms of you wanted to tell some truths, but perhaps were concerned about presenting them as absolute truth, whereas in fiction, you can always say, well, it's a novel, it's a story.
Yeah, well, I'm still a little bit worried about this version that I might get pulled in by the Pentagon and put in Guantanamo Bay. I'll be honest, I was a bit too honest in it.
Disavow all knowledge of I mean, there are also questions in I don't want to get technical about this because it plays into the place for it, but I think there are questions about how you write as well. The kinds of, just in terms of the kinds of things you can, the style you use, the kind of voice you can use in a memoir is not a voice which necessarily, describing truth, describing real things, doesn't always work in fiction. Because again, although I think this is, people who have not yet read it, it's a very unusual novel. Structurally, it's very unusual in terms of tone, in terms of lots of things. It's very unusual. But my observation from having worked with you on it is that you did have to struggle with that to some extent. I don't know if you felt the same, though.
No, I mean, absolutely. It was an incredible amount of work. I mean, just during the MA, just back and forth, and Conrad as well, just kept being like, it doesn't sound like a novel, it's too much like memoir, too much like memoir. And ultimately, how I fixed that is I hate dialogue. The initial nonfiction bit, there was almost no dialogue in it. So I was like, well, let me just try writing mostly dialogue. And if you read it, it's almost 100% dialogue.
I was going to say, you couldn't have gone to a further extreme in that it's almost entirely dialogue, isn't it?
Which I hate. It's interesting that it seems to work.
No, I think it works very well, and that's one of the unusual things about it. I mean, hope everybody here will buy a copy and read it. Also, it's absolutely terrific. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's really affecting in all kinds of ways. But it's a hard book to describe in some ways. On one hand, you can say it's about this character's experience in Afghanistan. It's a war story. I want to sort of come back to that, but in terms of the approach, in terms of the way you tell the story, it's very unusual. And I'm not sure if you're aware how unusual it is, or how deliberate is that.
Well, I don't know if I've ever told you this, because I know you hate poetry, but I've always actually thought of it as a very long poem in my own format. So I think there is an element of deliberate, but also you do know me, and some of it is by mistake.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about the protagonist of this, and that's one of the unusual things is the way you present Bryde. No relationship there whatsoever. Stephen King. I tried to find the reference this afternoon. I couldn't find it. Stephen King said at some point, "Never confuse the teller with the tale." But how much of you is Bryde? Well, who is on every page and every line of this book?
Yeah, I suppose out of all the characters, he's probably the most factual. Historical, I suppose. I hope that doesn't change your opinion of me.
No.
I don't know if you read it, but anyways, I think it's the closest character to reality. The Neil Gaiman thing we had to do in the MA, I don't like Neil Gaiman, but I thought it was a great exercise. And I did his masterclass, and he talks about how you need to just write yourself, and you need to be honest, and people will like that. And I struggled with that a long time, and I finally was like, I'm just going to do it, and if I hate it, I hate it. And I
think one of the interesting things about the way you present Bryde here is, like I say, you can't escape him in the book. He permeates every word, every line. There's no movement away from him, really, at any point. But despite that, he remains something of a cipher, I think. I think he remains a blank in some ways. He's sort of coldly realistic and analytical at all times, and unemotional. There's a certain lack of affect to much of the way the story is told, despite the fact that the story is deeply gripping. And the experiences he has are incredibly moving and affecting. How do you want the reader to relate to Bryde in this book?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I suppose I just was like, I'll just give them how it is, and they can like it or not. Like I said, it's probably the most. I think some of the characters are like the. One of the corporals is actually like 10 different Marines that I knew melded together, whereas this one is mostly me. I don't know.
I mean, because one of the things that's remarkable about it, because the book, you think the book wouldn't work, but it does, is that I say he permeates every word of this, but we're never really in his head in this, because it's almost all dialogue and even sort of lots of incidents are recalled and reported, if you will. But he speaks that in dialogue, so he sort of tells the stories. But the thing that people always talk about with fiction, with novels in particular, the thing that separates novels from films, for example, is the ability to get inside characters' heads, right? Get those internal monologues, which is usually what people love about books, whether they're in first person or third person. It doesn't matter. And I don't think you ever go inside his head. I think we understand him to some extent, but there's at no point do we get, oh, I thought, or that sort of stream of consciousness or anything like that. I mean, I assume you're aware of that, and that's a deliberate decision.
Yeah. No, it is, and I think during the workshop, a lot of the other girls who were in the workshop, I was the only guy, by the way, in our MA.
It was an interesting year.
Yeah, it was a great year. But a lot of them kept bringing up, numbness and all this kind of thing. And that's sort of a main theme, is the character is numb and traumatized. And it's fairly common for Marines or military in general, where you just become gradually more numb. And you're not supposed to get too much of that, because it's sort of blocked, and not just from other people, but the individual, I think, as well.
But again, I think one of the real achievements of the book is the degree to which we engage, despite not being able to get inside him in the way we expect to. So I think it's quite a brave decision to do that, quite a bold one. I wonder. I mean, if we have time, we'll come back to talking about the publishing of this. But I know you had some interaction with agents about the book. I wondered, was that something that came up at any point? Did anyone say, "Oh no, I want to be more inside this character," or did you ever consider going more inside this character in that way?
No, not really. The main agent I talked to, very nice lady. She only does New York Times bestsellers. So I was like, oh, that's nice, she's interested. But she wanted me to double the length. I was like, happy that you want more of it, but I'm not doing it.
I think the other interesting thing about Brody is the depiction of Marines, the depiction of life as a Marine, which, and I appreciate that there may be people here who understand it as deeply as you do. But I suspect many of us, like myself, our understanding plays and extend beyond the films that we've seen, or the books that we've read, or the TV shows. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you wanted to present him as a Marine and the Marines more broadly in writing a book like this.
Yeah, I've told a lot of people I didn't start out trying to write an anti-war novel initially, but that's kind of what it became. And also, I didn't really try to write a novel that was sort of talking bad about the Marine Corps either. I love the Marine Corps. And I think it's actually very critical in the Marine Corps and very critical in the Pentagon and the American government and all this kind of thing. But it just came because I was just like, I'm just going to be 100% honest with this. And that's just how it ended up. So I'd just say that's an accurate portrayal. Someone's grandmother recently gave a review of it that she didn't think it was very pleasant because one of the scenes was horrible. And it's like, well, that's just the reality of it.
I mean, but there are a number of horrible scenes, but brilliantly rendered, I think, and entirely necessary to the book as well, to our understanding of Brody's situation and the broader situation of the Marines put into this seemingly impossible a situation. Are you conflicted about, or were you conflicted about your job as a Marine, your role as a Marine, versus what the Marines had to do in these circumstances?
Yeah, so There's quite a bit of talk about that in that, just that the moral conflict, moral injury, and that kind of thing, and being ordered to do something and whether or not you follow it, or a situation where objectively you're supposed to shoot someone, but you know that they're just a stupid local who doesn't know the rules.
Maybe I've already asked this and you've answered, I don't know, but do you think Brodie is a sympathetic character? Do you want him to be a sympathetic character? Do you care? I mean, that's right. That's normally what's expected in fiction. Is that at the very least we empathize with the characters, and sometimes people will say sympathize. Should we sympathize with Brodie here? What response do you want the reader to have to Brodie in this book?
I think there's an appropriate amount of sympathy you can have for the character as it is. Just naturally as a person to see someone go through these kinds of things. But I never purposefully made the character more sympathetic for any reason. Like, for example, it was the story with the dog that, and all that. That's actually a pretty true story. I didn't skew it to make it be like, oh, he loves dogs and cats and that kind of thing. And it's true. Got a cat at home. A bad cat.
Well, one of the interesting things in the book is it comes up, I think, 2 or 3 times, but mentioned in the slightest way, which is, and there's no spoiler here. I don't think there could be spoilers for this book. To be honest, I don't think it's not that kind of story. He mentions, or there is mentioned, a past love interest that he had, who about whom he's still unbearably sad, who can't even hear her name mentioned. And in most books, I dare say, many books, most books, that would be, you'd have a flashback to, that person or something like that. But the fact that she is so casually mentioned, but at the same time, I think you understand his loss and his upset about it. Were you at any point tempted to delve into that any further?
No, because on the one hand it was true, but on the other hand I think it's quite a normal thing for military guys to have that sort of similar thing. I wanted to just portray it, and they don't usually talk about it. And if they do, in the sequel, there's a little bit more chat on it, because that's a totally different subject. But no, it's as it is purposefully.
Because it goes with the fact that, I've had the pleasure of working with Chris as an undergraduate, as an MA student, as a doctoral student, and I've seen lots of bits of this. So I sort of lost track myself, if I'm being honest with you. In one version, I think it's what you wrote for Richard, but I can't remember now. And when I'm talking about, so I think it was memoir rather than fiction. There was more about this character's early life. Mm-hmm. So there was, I can remember reading bits about childhood and different times. Now what I can't remember is that was memoir or early versions of the novel. And again, I can imagine the agent saying, "Oh, can we see his backstory? Can we see how he got to be where he is?" But you excised all of that, even though you'd written some of it, whether it was his memoir or not. You excised all of that from the novel. Mm-hmm. What brought about that decision that we don't see any of his history?
I think there's still some echoes of it in there that I kept. But yeah, I did cut probably 100,000 words of that kind of stuff and other little bits, because I just thought it was unnecessary. And
it's what most publishers, editors would say, give us more of that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it will come out in the sequel. It's not been thrown away by any means.
That's good.
But yeah, I didn't think it was necessary for the story I wanted to tell in this bit, because I wanted it to be fairly short. It's just over 40,000 words. It barely meets the novel criteria. Yeah. But I thought, as that form works, I can only make it so long for it to be sustainable.
Yeah, although, you can see all the places where you could add if you wanted to. Not to sound like the agent you spoke to, but I do sound like the agent that you spoke to. Let me just keep an eye on time here as well. Obviously, religion plays an important part in this book. Yeah. Half of the book is essentially conversations that Brodie has with a a Catholic priest, and a Protestant chaplain. And those are really fascinating. And in fact, again, we don't get into those characters' heads either, but they become quite interesting characters. I'm actually particularly interested in the conversations that he has with the chaplain, even more than the priest, because the character is quite a devout Catholic, as you are. I think that's a fair description. These two characters serve as foils for him to deal with lots of the ethical questions, some of the bigger, some of the religious questions. How much of that was I'm going back to the line between memoir and fiction, I suppose. How much of that relates to your conflicts at the time and the questions that you had, given the circumstances that you found yourself in?
Yeah, so that sort of form, like the different characters and everything. So part of the reason that I started doing that is I was just interested in how different people talk to different people, and the things I would confess to Father Peter are not the things I would confess to you. One would hope. So the Protestant chaplain is one of my favorite characters, partially based on two different Protestant chaplains I used to argue with all the time in the military, but also like the sort of that. You'll notice, like the Catholic priest who he regularly confesses to, that's just it, and eventually they don't really have any conversation. Whereas the Protestant one, they actually develop a little friendship because of the banter and everything.
That's one of the really interesting things about it, though, is in that sense that the chaplain becomes, I think, the other most lifelike, most alive character in the book because of the relationship that they have. Even though Brodie dismisses Protestantism in a lot of ways, and of course he's an army chaplain, which makes him completely anathema, right? It couldn't, not only is he not Catholic, he's not a Marine. Well, that's just. But that makes for a really interesting set of conversations that arise, and I think he's an interesting foil for your protagonist. But I wonder, and you raise really deep questions in these conversations. Do you think you've resolved these questions for yourself? Or is this book in part a way of still asking those questions?
Yeah, my second year at St. Mary's, I was back at Walter Reed, and I got electroconvulsion therapy 8 times, and spinal cord stimulator put in my back, and a bunch of lovely surgeries. And I think if I hadn't had the electroconvulsion therapy in particular, I don't know if I could have ever written that, just because it was pretty bloody miserable. I don't know. Can you say the question again? Sorry.
Well, I'm wondering. I mean, the questions you raise, I'm not sure they're answerable questions. To be honest. I think they're very deep questions about right and wrong, and good and evil is a bit of an overstatement of it. But about how we should behave, about what our responsibilities are, what our obligations are to, depending on one's beliefs, to ourselves, to God, to the world, to our brothers, brothers and sisters, to our country. And I wonder, and I'm making the terrible assumption here, which don't confuse the teller with the tale. I know I said that already. That these are questions which you must have felt yourself. And was this book a way of trying to answer those questions? Do you feel like you've answered some of those questions for yourself, or are they not answerable questions? Is this an ongoing quest?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe some of them have been. Some of them definitely aren't. I've told a couple of people that if you read this and then you still want to join the military as a young man, you're probably the right type of person to join because you've been properly informed. And you know that there's these conflicts where it's like your typical recruiter will just lie and tell you some bullshit about the free food and the chow hall and the bonus and all that. But yeah, I guess it depends on which one. I think some of them have been resolved, or at least there's some peace there, or not quite as dark of a place. Like I don't want to kill myself every day, like I used to before. But it's from that character from that time. It's essentially a story about someone who's recently been crippled, and this is the mentality when you first get to the hospital. And that is what I've seen. I was there for 4 years, and I know plenty of people who've gone through it, and they all kind of have that similar issue. So that's what I wanted to portray.
I suppose what I was ask is, I think for a lot of people, writing, fiction in particular, but it doesn't have to be fiction, I think writing is a kind of therapy. And now the therapist in the book is the villain. To the extent, not villain, you clearly don't like him, or Brody doesn't like him, and clearly you have contempt for that.
Yeah.
But I think therapy can be one goes through one's own therapy, and lots of people talk about fiction or use fiction or writing in general as a way to investigate issues in their lives or things they struggle with, and I can't help but think that this offers some of that to you, and this is also written at quite a distance from the events, the real life events, which is what more than 15 years ago. Now, what was 16 years ago?
16 years ago today.
16 years ago today.
Yeah. I didn't schedule it that way. That was my wife.
That's quite extraordinary, really.
Yeah. It was the only day available, so it was kind of odd.
Yes, the fates conspire, don't they? But I mean, how much did you need that distance to be able to delve into this? Did you need that distance? I shouldn't stack the question.
Yeah, I suppose the Millsian ideology I was taught gave me a little bit of distance, like being able to. You can say memoir, but is it actually memoir? I mean, even the first nonfiction bit, I think is potentially an argument that it wasn't memoir. That's a different argument we can have later.
There's always that question about memoirs.
Yeah.
The question of truth remains even in nonfiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, could you have written this any earlier? Do you think, or did you need this amount of time to reflect not just on the events but on your life or things that have happened since, in order to be able to present this to other people?
Well, definitely, in order to be half decent, it needed to be nowish. Over the years, I tried writing little bits, and it couldn't come out. It would just make me more depressed and that kind of thing. So yeah, the distance as far as time definitely is important.
Because even just in the technical sense, I think one of the things, and none of these people Richard could know this. I mean, you came to us as an undergraduate, and obviously you were not an 18-year-old right out of high school or A levels, and you've done other degrees and stuff. And you wrote very well from the start. I mean, I can't pretend otherwise that you weren't writing well from the first piece you submitted in year one. But your writing has also advanced in leaps and bounds, in my view, across the 5 years that I've known you. I don't think you could have written anything as sophisticated and as mature as this when I met you five years ago. And I wonder how you feel about your writing over the course of that time.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember telling someone, maybe it was Errol who's here, or someone else on the BA. The last year, I was like, my writing's actually better. The creative writing course actually works. So thank you for that. It was,
I'm not taking any credit whatsoever, but I think it's clear that again, just in terms of the sophistication at the level of prose, but also at the level of structure and the way you piece this together. On the one hand, I'm not surprised that you've written such a fine piece of